In the last video, we looked at strategies for competing internationally and dealt with issues ranging from globalization to expansion to combining national institutions. We also reviewed four main strategies for competing overseas based on the pressure for cost reductions and local responsiveness. Finally, we looked at Porter's National Competitive Advantage Framework and saw how this impacted regional clusters. In this final video, we will look at tactics for supplementing a selected strategy. If you recall from our very first video in this series, we noted the important distinction between strategy and tactics. The right strategy will tell you the direction to move and the priority of all other things. Tactics without a defined strategy will leave you packing suntan lotion for a trip to New Zealand in July, which is the middle of the winter. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu said it best: strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before the defeat.
Changes in strategy and tactics. As a multi-business enterprise, GE has changed its corporate strategy over the last few years by moving away from slow-growing businesses such as financial services and entertainment to future growth industries such as clean tech and healthcare. This is not the first time that GE has gone through such a transformation. Back in the 1980s, when the CEO, Jack Welch, was running GE, he famously wrote down three overlapping circles and described them as services, core, and high technology. Jack Welch then defined the divisions that were inside or outside of those three circles. If they were outside, they were to be sold off. If they were inside, he said that they should be number one or number two in each of their respective industries. If they were not, Jack said to fix, sell, or close the business. This is the kind of conscious choice that we see as part of strategic decision-making. GE Capital has been cut down substantially and now only represents a fraction of the net income in 2014 compared to 2007, when it provided more than half of the conglomerate's net income. Many of these changes were based on moving from a paradigm of efficiency to a paradigm of effectiveness based on external growth and focusing on developing countries. Also, after investing $1 billion into GE appliances over the last few years, GE sold off this entire business unit to Electrolux for $3.3 billion. Some may look at this as a short-sighted focus on immediate profits, while others look at it as a continuation of the GE strategy from the 90s by Jack Welch that should have happened much quicker and for a lot more business units. When we look at sustainable performance for GE, we see organic growth at only 4 to 7%, while bottom line growth depends on cutting sales, general, and administrative expense from 15.9% to 12%, expanding margins from 15.7% to 17% through cost cutting, and using cash on hand of $90 billion, most of which is long-term debt, to pay dividends, buy back stock, and fund future acquisitions. Based on this relatively weak outlook, the only real options for growth and an acceptable return on equity, ROE, is through continued acquisitions in high-growth businesses and divesting the company of poor-performing operations. This willingness to divest the company of certain business units is based on the law of free market economics and is critical to the long-term success of an organization. This law states that competitors will continue to enter your market space as long as their returns are greater than the cost of capital. One way to measure this is by looking at the historical equity spread for different industries. Equity spread is calculated by subtracting the cost of equity from the return on equity. Once this goes to zero or negative, the company is no longer making a profit on a pure equity basis. The graph here shows a total of 2,200 companies consolidated into 25 industries and plots their historical equity spread by industry over a 15-year period. As you can see from this chart, about half of the companies show a positive historical equity spread, and the other half of the companies have negative historical equity spread. You will also note that the overall shape of the chart is a normal distribution curve. This gives a strong indication that over time it is common for industries to lose money. This is where vertical integration and diversification become important. These are two fundamental corporate strategy topics for execution: vertical integration or diversification. When it comes to the need for diversification, Joseph Schumpeter, a famous economist from the turn of the 20th century, coined the phrase, the creative destruction of capital. This strategy allows for a company to divest itself of poor-performing businesses or operations in a specific industry where the market forces have become very strong. The ability and willingness of a company to exit some markets and aggressively enter others is a rare execution of strategy to find these days. Under the leadership of Jack Welch, there was a clear plan on which business units to keep and which ones to eliminate. The strategy definitely paid off during the 80s and the 90s, with GE benefiting from phenomenal growth through acquisition, restructuring, and a cultural revolution of continual learning. and performance ranking systems, which rewarded top performers in the company. This raises a good question. How do you support corporate-level strategy with the right tactics? Decisions that senior management makes and the actions it takes in the quest for competitive advantage lead the company to specific industries on where to compete. Management must clarify the firm's focus on specific product and geographic markets. However, the ultimate responsibility for the corporate strategy rests with the CEO. It is important to remember that corporate strategy concerns the scope of the firm, which determines the boundaries along 3 dimensions: industry value chain, products and services, and geography. There are 3 critical questions for supplementing the strategy. A. In what stages of the industry value chain does the management team want to participate? This would lead to steps towards vertical integration. B. What range of products and services would be offered to the customers? This leads to steps towards diversification. And finally, C. Where in the world to compete? This would lead to a local versus global strategy. As we delve deeper into global DNA, we can show some examples for supplementing the basic 8 strategies with vertical integration, outsourcing, diversification through new product development, and local versus global strategy through expansion from regional to global markets. Using an example from the home improvement industry in an earlier video, we showed several different strategies for global DNA. Local broad cost leader. This would be your mom and pop store. Local broad differentiator. Something like the Do It Center. Local niche cost leader. For example, Wolf Lighting. Local niche differentiator. Orchard Supply. The global strategies. Global broad cost leader. A company like Home Depot. Global broad differentiator. For example, Lowe's. Global niche cost leader. True Value. And finally, global niche differentiator. A company like Ace Hardware. Manufacture or outsource. When the costs of pursuing an activity in-house are less than the costs of transacting for that activity in the market, then the firm should vertically integrate by moving production of the needed inputs or the channels for the distribution of outputs. A good way to lay out these decisions is to consider the matrix of manufacture versus outsource based on advantages and disadvantages of each. Here, for example, we can see the following: advantages for manufacture: command and control, coordination, and community knowledge gained that can be part of the learning organization. Disadvantages for manufacture: low-powered incentives, principal-agent problem, and high administrative costs. Advantages for outsourcing: high-powered incentives and flexibility. Disadvantages for outsourcing: search costs, incomplete contracting, additional costs of managing and enforcing contracts over time. Another tool that is helpful when supporting the strategy is to look at the spectrum of internal manufacture, or outsource, along a continuum from less integrated to more integrated. Outsourcing is clearly less integrated. However, it allows for arm's-length market transactions, short-term contracts, all the way up to long-term contracts for licensing or franchising. Strategic alliances would be the next step, with either equity alliance or joint venture. Toward the other end of the spectrum, we have full-on manufacturing as a wholly owned subsidiary or in-house operations. In the case of vertical integration, the entire supply chain may be owned by the company, along a spectrum from raw material all the way up to after-sales service and support. A close review of the chart will show that it goes from raw materials to components and intermediate goods, to final assembly and manufacturing, to marketing and sales, and finally, to after-sales service and support. Some of the benefits of vertical integration include secure critical supplies, lower costs, the ability to improve quality, facilitating scheduling and planning, and facilitating investments in specialized assets. This is not without saying that there are some real risks from vertical integration. These risks include increasing costs, reduced overall quality, reducing flexibility, and increasing the potential for legal repercussions. There are some viable alternatives to vertical integration, depending on the overall strategy. These alternatives include the following: taper integration, where the management team backwardly integrates with reliance on outside market firms for some of its supplies. Strategic outsourcing, where the management team sends out non-core activities such as HR and banking. Corporate diversification, where the organization can provide economies of scale or exploit economies of scope, and finally, reduce overall costs. Enhance performance through restructuring and using internal capital markets. This is about restructuring of the company to avoid vertical integration but still provide the benefits of lower costs and overall less risk. Example from Global DNA. For a walkthrough demonstration of the management decisions in line with a global broad cost leader, here is Dr. Jason Scott Earl.
Here we will demonstrate the benefits and risks of diversification in global DNA by walking through management decisions by functions that would help support a strategy in line with a global broad cost leader. Here I've logged in as the Chester Company. You can see it's round 6, which represents year 2021. And I can go to the R&D or Research and Development Department. Here we see 2 products listed, the cake and cuppy product. They're shown here with specifications. They also show up here on the perceptual map. I can click on them. It'll show the speed, accuracy, service life, and age for both products. You'll also note that these products are shown here relative to accuracy and speed. And if I drag the timeline over the first year and second year, you can see that these markets drift towards higher accuracy and higher speed. You'll also note that there are 2 markets, the budget market and the performance market. And based on the positioning of these products, and also the fact that they're selling into all 3 areas, the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific, this really puts us in the position of a potential global broad cost leader. To help further this strategy, I could launch a new product and call it Candle. And as I position the product, I can show where it is relative to my existing products. In this case, I want to put it right next to my cuppy product. So I'll give it a speed of 8 and an accuracy of 9. I can input that information here. Service life of 22,000 hours. And I'll have all 3 region kits listed here. I can go ahead and recalculate, and it immediately shows where this product is. Notice that it's not going to come out until December 22nd or December 23rd of 2022, and when it does, it's going to have an age of 0. So if this is 2021, I'm really looking at this coming out in approximately 2 years, at which point the markets will have drifted up to here. Now for this broad cost leader strategy, I am okay with this positioning, and what I really want to do now is focus on the marketing. Here it shows all 3 of my products, and I can see that cake is indeed selling in the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific. Cuppy is also selling into all 3 regions, and Candle is currently not selling because it's not yet been released. I can also see where I could spend money on promotion, which would track with awareness of the product for the consumers. I can spend money on sales, which would allow for greater accessibility through distribution. I can move on here to production, and here I can plan the actual production and capacity for my products. Overall, current automation level is 5.6. The key part of the global broad cost leader strategy would be to help increase automation to lower my overall material cost position. So here I could raise this to perhaps 6.2, recalculate. This will show the total cost to increase from 5.6 to 6.2 in overall automation. This is a very capital intensive strategy and requires low sales, general, and administrative expense to drive my net margins. In addition to lower material cost, plant automation will help improve margins, and I'll really want to focus on having multiple products per market to help increase that awareness. Finally, my last area, I can click on finance, and here I can get information on the ratios for the company, the overall P&L and balance sheet, and the working capital. So these are the 4 main functions: R&D, marketing, production, and finance. And going back again to the production side, I can look at this by region. And this is a key part of a global broad cost leader. I'd want to make sure that these tactics are in line with each of these areas. So I can see it for Europe as well as Asia Pacific.
This concludes our walkthrough of global DNA.
At the end of the day, picking the right strategy is not nearly as important as selecting the tactics that will support that strategy and get the company in the direction that it needs to go in order to see success. Consequently, the management team's ability to consistently execute on these tactics is paramount. Strategy is ultimately about defining a direction and creating a sustainable competitive advantage through positioning and a conscious choice to perform specific activities. In many cases, these are difficult choices where senior management must decide what they will not do in order to align specific functions to help maintain their competitive advantage. Over the last 7 videos, we've articulated how the organization can gain a sustainable competitive advantage through an effective understanding of 1, what strategy is and why it's important. 2, how strategy helps to chart the long-term direction. 3, assessing internal readiness and external environment. 4, Porter's 5 forces analysis. 5, the basic competitive strategies. 6, strategies for competing internationally. And finally, 7, tactics for supplementing a selected strategy. A company with a clearly delineated strategy can put their strategy on a page, which 1, clearly articulates the vision or direction of the company. 2, makes specific choices about where they will play and how they will win. 3, defines actions or tactics that drive their potential. And 4, describe a roadmap to deliver results, including building the organizational capacity to execute on the strategy. When all is said and done, execution trumps strategy, and strategy trumps tactics. Best of luck with your execution skills as you embark on your chosen strategy and tactics for the global DNA business simulation. Good luck.